gentlemen, this is Frank Chase back with you. It's been a long time. Now, I came back to do a video or a small conversation about this concept of tithing, as you have seen many times that I have discussed. Now, lately, I guess in the past month or maybe the past 3-4 months, you've probably heard some shocking and yet amazing news about the mega preacher and mega pastor, Creflo Dollar, who finally admitted, and I am just completely shocked, finally admitted that the teachings about tithing that he has propagated across the pulpit for decades, he is now admitting that he was wrong. And so it makes my book even more important to read because it is puzzling. Why did Creflo Dollar decide that tithing is not biblical? Let's talk about it. We'll be right back. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. So I left off by asking a question. Why is the tithe often misinterpreted? Or better yet, let's start with Creflo Dollar. It has been said that he might have read my book, but I'd highly doubt that he read my book, Kleptomaniac, Who's Really Robbing God Anyway. But it's a nice gesture by some of the people who have read my book that Creflo Dollar changed his mind on tithing and set off a theological conundrum in the institutional church. And that is because many of the leading megapastors went to him and have attacked him for his position. Now, I honestly believe that this is happening because it is messing with the bottom line, and that's the pocketbook or the purse or the money. Because for him to make this monumental decision to reject the doctrine of tithing sets the whole church upside down and turns the theology of modern day tithing on its head. Of course, as you know, I wrote my book about 6 years ago disagreeing with tithing. So we're going to probably go back and do a little review so that we can understand why there has been misinterpretation. My point is Creflo Dollar probably knew all along that tithing was incorrect. And I guess by speculation, and I am speculating, he may have done some research. He may have read more into it. But, lately, it seems that he's went silent ever since the video came out, and all of the leading church bishops and pastors have counseled and probably called him on the phone and told him to take it back and reject his position. I don't think he has, but he's been silent ever since. I haven't seen much more, and if you know anything more about it, you can let me know. But I'm not sure why Creflo Dollar has went silent on his position on tithing, but it stands to be that no matter what he believes and no matter what he says now, the tithe in the form of money has never been what the Bible taught. So we're going to go back and look at some things that I've taught in the past or talk about it in another way so you can get an understanding on why there has been misinterpretation. We'll be right back. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. So here is the question. I'm not sure about Creflo Dollar, but it is a shocking thing that he made that switch, which means that some people have suggested that he give back every penny that he collected over the 30 or 40, 30 years in ministry. Whether he will do that is up to him, I guess. But he told everyone to throw away every teaching and tape and book that they bought concerning this subject. Now, I would suggest that he would probably need to give refunds, but I don't know if that's going to happen. So why is this subject difficult for a lot of people to understand? Is because when you have been indoctrinated over centuries concerning the word tithe, you have cognitive dissonance based on when someone tells you what you have been taught is incorrect. So, why is the tithe misinterpreted? Well, even in the theological circles, the tithe is not necessarily agreed upon by theologians. Some theologians taught that the tithe was 3 different tithes, or it was one tithe divided up 3 different ways. Now listen to this. The ISB, this is a biblical resource, suggests that all 3 tithes came from the original tithe, and 3 separate tithes did not exist. So you see, people didn't agree whether it was 1 tithe or 3 tithes. But I do know this, there was a tithe, the tithe was tied to the sabbatical cycle. And there was 3 Sabbaths in Israel, and during those 3 different Sabbaths, there was a tithe given from the land concerning crops and cattle. So when we come back, we're going to talk about this a little more. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back. So the Orthodox tithe in Israel basically is misunderstood because most people do not understand the history, the culture, the religious practices, and the customs of the Hebrew people in the Old Testament. This is one of the reasons why confusion exists, why everybody thinks tithing is cold, hard cash. So when the Bible says in Leviticus 27, 30, and 32, it clearly defines the tithe, and it says, and all the tithe of the land, whether the seed of the land or the fruit of the tree, is the Lord's. It is holy unto the Lord. In Leviticus 27, 30 through 33, it tells you distinctly that it is. Now, the tithe of the land. The word land in Hebrew gives you an indication of what the word tithe means. Tithe of the land. Land in Hebrew is eretz. It is eretz, ladies and gentlemen. And it means ground. It means stuff that grows out of the land. So it was crops. And then Leviticus 27, 30 through 33 says the tithe from the animals, herds, and flocks. And it says the tithe was supposed to be every 10th animal. Not 10% of the animals, but every 10th animal or livestock. This is confusing, I know, for a lot of people. But as we go through this, you're going to find out that if you go by the original language and the original interpretation in Hebrew, you can't miss it. It's pretty clear. We'll be right back. We are back. So let's get into this a little deeper. So many of you know that Israel roamed the desert for decades. And if tithing was a consistent system, how in the world would they pay God a tithe in the desert? Well, logic and reason would tell you that it couldn't happen. So tithing actually began when they got to the land of Canaan. The full system of tithing started when they got to the land of Canaan. It is important to understand that the tithe is land-based. So when Leviticus 27, 30 through 33 says, I want a tithe of the land and the fruit of the tree, how in the world do a lot of people interpret that as money from your paycheck? It's just simply illogical. Now, where they make the switch, an inaccurate interpretation, is they use what you would call exegesis, or eisegesis rather, by saying an incorrect hermeneutics, by saying, well, because their system of economy back then was land, our system of economy today is money. But I can refute that, because if any of us study the Bible with any regularity, we know that Israel had money and land and grew crops and raised cattle. But not one time was the money in Israel ever used as a tithe. Now, there are specific situations in the Old Testament where God wanted them to bring the tithe to the temple if they lived far away. But he made an adjustment for people who lived far away. He told them to turn the tithe into money and bring it to the temple. And you can read my book to find out all of this information. Now, the question is, why did he do that? If Israelites lived far away and they had to carry all these crops and all this cattle, 9 times out of 10, they would have been robbed on the journey, or most of the stuff would have spoiled, or many of the animals may have died on the journey trying to get from where they lived to the temple, wherever it was. So he told them to turn it into money. When they got to the place that God had set for the tithe to be given, he said, rebuy the tithe. So, and let me kind of move forward to the New Testament. At one point in the scripture, the Messiah, Jesus, turned over the money tables in the temple and said, you have made God's house a den of thieves. Now, what was going on? So all of the people that were gathering at the temple who had brought money, there was temple robbery going on, simply because the people who brought the tithe in the form of money, who converted it, had to come to the temple, and others who had bought crops and cattle, they were selling to others who had brought, and the temple leadership were tipping the scales and robbing the people and charging more. And it was a highway robbery. And so Jesus went in the temple and turned over all the money changers' tables and said, you have made my house a den of thieves. So as you can see, even back in the biblical times, there was highway robbery going on in the church or in the temple. And so that's why God made special allowances for people who live far away to convert their tithe to money. But then they had to go rebuy the crops and the cattle and all the conversion rates. And so it's just simply amazing once you discover this. And these are the little tidbits that you learn when you study this subject. So we'll be right back, and I probably will conclude with one more tidbit before we end this video. We'll be right back. We are back. So let's conclude with something here. No matter what you believe and what you do with your money is up to you. But biblically, hermeneutically, and with proper exegesis, money can never be described or defined as a tithe. If money is given to your church, the limited definition of that biblically means that it's just a gift or an offering, but it can never be defined as a tithe. And so when you decide to take the word tithe, which in Hebrew means ma'asar, and when it is defined in its original context to mean everything edible, which comes down to livestock and crops, and then you change it over to money without biblical authority and impose a 10% tax on man's labor or the labor of people who go to work, you are legitimizing theft, basically. But that cannot be the case. So when you do that, it just creates a problem. It is better to stick with the proper definition and the proper interpretation of the Bible. So when you go to Hebrews 7 and 5, it is pretty clear who gets the tithe. Now, I know churches and pastors and everybody decides they want to get the money and call it a tithe. Here's what Hebrews 7 and 5 says. And I call this the nail in the proverbial coffin of those who say they can collect money as tithes. The verse says, and indeed, those who are of the sons of Levi, remember that, those who are the sons of Levi who receive the priesthood have the commandment to receive tithes from the people according to the law, that is, from their brethren, though they have come from the loins of Abraham. And you can run your own reference in Hebrews 7 and 5 and then recheck it in Numbers 18, 21 through 32, which is the legislation that backs up Hebrews 7 and 5. So when Creflo Dollar says that he taught tithing wrong, he is absolutely correct. What he was teaching about monetary tithing is wrong. And it has been wrong for decades. And you can do with your money what you please, ladies and gentlemen. Don't get me or misinterpretate me here. I'm not telling you not to give to your church or your place of worship or wherever you go. But when you give in with a free will heart. Give with a free will heart. And it's not based on percentage. Nothing in the Bible is based on percentage. The tithe was not 10%. It was every 10th animal and a 10th part of the crops. So, ladies and gentlemen, we don't know why Creflo Dollar has went silent, but I will not until this truth about biblical tithing reaches the whole world. Give from your heart. Give freely, as the New Testament says, but don't ever call it a tithe. And if you read my book, you will find more detail than you could imagine about the practice of biblical tithing by the Hebrew people in Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this little tidbit. See you again. Now, I don't know when I'll do another video, but just think about it. The tithe of the land and the fruit of the tree. That's what God wanted. And it went to the priesthood, the Levites, not to pastors, not to churches. So think about it. Take care.